Hi, everyone. Welcome in. Hi. Hello, everyone.
Good
Welcome.
morning.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy to see you all today. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. We're so glad you could be here with us today. My name is Jessica Owens. I'm a public education specialist with the UC Davis Resource Center for Family Focused Practice. And you are here joining us for our March Complex Care webinar. It's great to see you all today. If you wouldn't mind, please go ahead and take a moment to share in the chat who you are and what county or agency you represent. Let's see who we have in the room so far. All right. We got some folks from Sacramento, Merced, Shasta. Lots of people joining the call today. We got Placer, Santa Clara, Stanislaus. Welcome in, everyone. We're so glad you could be here with us today. So as always, if you see someone you know in the audience, a friend or a colleague, please reach out to them and say hello. Before we get started with our program today, I wanted to share something I found with you all. And first, I want to tell you a little bit more about myself. So as I mentioned, my name is Jessica Owens. I'm a public education specialist with the UC Davis Resource Center for Family Focused Practice. And before I joined the UC Davis team about 2.5, almost 3 years ago, I worked in the nonprofit world of foster care for many, many years. I worked as a master's level transitional housing program social worker for 10 years. And so my professional experience in the field of social work began closer to 25 years ago when I was a youth in care volunteering with the policy advocacy organization, California Youth Connection. So I wanted to share a little bit about me with you all today because March is Social Work Month. So March is National Social Work Month, which means it is a time to recognize and celebrate the contributions of social workers and the profession. Many of you all in this room may not be social workers, but you probably work with social workers closely on a regular basis. And just because you don't have the title social worker doesn't mean you aren't making valuable contributions in this field and helping to change the lives of the youth and the families that we work with. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that Social Work Month is a time to uplift social workers and their contributions, encourage support for the profession, promote awareness for the vital role social workers play in communities, and learn about social work careers and the services they provide. The 2025 theme for Social Work Month is compassion and action. So I recently came across this poem that really, really resonated with me, and I would love to share it with you all. So here goes. Here's to the bridge builders, the hand holders, the light bringers, those extraordinary souls wrapped in ordinary lives who quietly weave threads of humanity into an inhumane world. They are the unsung heroes in a world at war with itself. They are the whisperers of hope that peace is possible. Look for them in this present darkness. Light your candle with their flame. And then go. Build bridges. Hold hands. Bring light to a dark and desperate world. Be the hero you are looking for. Peace is possible. It begins with us. So I just wanted to leave you all with that. I'm going to go ahead and actually copy and paste that into the chat for you all. And please, find time to acknowledge, celebrate, and support those social workers in your lives. Have compassion for yourself. But thank you all for letting me share. Okay, so where we're going to next, we would like to get a better idea of who is in our audience, what kind of organization you work for, and what role you play. This gives us an idea of who is here, but it also shows our presenters who is in our audience as well. So I'm going to ask for some support from my colleague James. And we are going to drop our Zoom poll and get a better idea of who's all in the audience with us today. Thanks, James. So I see our first poll is up. Oh, wow, we have a large audience today. I see 244 people joining the webinar so far. That's great. All right, or anyone just joining the call? We are just completing a poll right now. And we're going to leave the poll open for about 20 more seconds. We have about 80% of the audience that has completed the poll. So thank you, thank you, thank you to those of you who have taken a moment to complete that. And I believe the poll is complete. And James, are you sharing the results of the poll? Can you all see the results? Okay, great. So it looks like 47% of our audience today is made up of leadership or admin staff. About 18% of the audience are therapists or clinicians. 4% are working in probation. And about 26% of you all are social workers. 15% are case managers or caseworkers. We have a couple of caregivers in the room. We have some parent partners, and we also have some youth or some former youth. So thank you all for participating and completing that poll. And we're going to do it one more time to get a better idea of what kind of organization you're coming from. All right, it's up. It's ready for you. It's always fun watching the results come in. I can see it on my end. You may not be able to see it yet. Awesome. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for taking a moment to complete the poll. We have about 70% of the audience so far. We're going to keep the poll open for about 10 more seconds. Okay. We are going to close that poll out in just a few more seconds here. Thank you to those of you who participated. We appreciate it. And can you all see the results of the poll? Yes, awesome. Okay, wonderful. So looking at the makeup of our audience, approximately 55% of you are working for a county agency. 13% of you are working for a state department. 18% are here from a community-based organization. We have a couple of community members in the room. We also have a tribe or tribal organization represented in our audience. And we also have a couple people from child abuse prevention. We have some folks from the Office of Education. Okay, we have a few folks from from regional centers. And if anyone put other as a different organization, please feel free to put that in the chat. We would love to know what organization you might be coming from. Great. All right, James, thank you so much. I think we can go ahead and stop sharing the poll. Awesome. All right, so once again, for those of you who are just joining our presentation today, my name is Jessica Owens. I'm a public education specialist with the UC Davis Resource Center for Family Focused Practice. You are here with us for our March Complex Care webinar. This webinar is brought to you in partnership between the UC Davis Resource Center for Family Focused Practice and the California Department of Social Services. I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items with you before we get started with our presentation. I do have a few of my UC Davis colleagues on the call with me. We have Geraldine Bordage and James Williams, who will also, who are here, will be monitoring the chat for questions. So as the presentation is happening, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We will do our best to answer questions in real time. Otherwise, there will also be time at the end of today's presentation to ask questions then. I wanted to remind you all today's presentation is being recorded. We will have a recording of the presentation as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint available on our Complex Care website. I'm going to go ahead and put that link in the chat for you all now. And if anyone is interested in learning more about a complex care case coaching session, you can also make that request through this next link I'm going to put in the chat. And last but not least, if you are interested in requesting a letter of attendance, you can make that request through this link. All right. I also wanted to share with you all another exciting learning opportunity from UC Davis. We recently we are supporting something called the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics Learning Collaborative. Those meetings take place once a month. And I'm going to drop some more information about the NMT Learning Collaborative. That collaborative is open. So if any of you are interested in attending or learning more, please do. So that's part one of the information about NMT. And then here is the rest of the information you need to join. All right, and I see a question in the chat in terms of the link being emailed. We don't email these links out, but if you need the link again, please go ahead and message either myself, Geraldine Bordage, or James, and we will make sure we get that link directly sent to you in the chat. Okay, now with that, all of that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and begin our program. So I always like to do a little bit of level setting before we begin with the presentation. So as a reminder, when the term complex care is used, it is intended to highlight the circumstances in which youth have a variety of identified needs across multiple domains that have been unmet, often over long periods of time, by behavioral health, child welfare, probation, education, and other systems. As a result, these youth need high-intensity, individualized treatment options to better resolve challenges and address their needs. By integrating services from multiple systems and Just one second. Okay. By integrating services from multiple systems and tailoring interventions to the specific needs of each youth, we are better able to provide comprehensive support and facilitate meaningful improvements in their lives. So we are really, really excited to bring you today's presentation. The title of today's webinar is How the CFT and IP-CANS processes support youth with complex care needs. Today's webinar will look at how the CFT and IP-CANS processes support these youth. The presentation will include discussions of some of the characteristics of youth who need complex care, challenges that are frequently encountered when serving youth in this population. However, we will also explore possible pathways to solutions. So with that being said, I am going to go ahead and kick it over to our very first presenter of today. And I have Rebecca Buckmiller. Please go ahead and come in and introduce yourself.
Good morning. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you all for being here today. It's really wonderful to see such a broad cross-section of folks that are doing this important work, both across the state and within our administration and agencies. My name is Rebecca Buckmiller. I am with CDSS. I'm in the System of Care branch here and the manager of the Integrated Services Unit. Our unit is responsible for several programs, but today we're going to talk a little bit primarily about the child and family team and the integrated practice child adolescent needs and strengths, otherwise both known as CFT and IP-CANS for short. A little bit about my background. My passion for this work comes really from my direct experience as a foster parent, adoptive parent, and as a parent partner and advocate for children in foster care, many of whom were children of complex needs. And that probably goes over quite a while, about 30 years now. So been here for a minute, seeing the progress in our systems. Coordination and access to care were often challenging to navigate. Say my connection's a little unstable. Hopefully everybody can hear me. The CFT and CANS process helps all those involved and responsible for the care of youth and family coordinate and support the youth and the family reach their goals. I personally couldn't have done it without the team I had, and I want to celebrate all of you who are committed to this work, especially for this month being social work. Okay, got a new process slide. There we go. So a little bit about our agenda. Oops, sorry, there's a little delay here. Okay, going back, part one. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the who, the characteristics common to youth with complex needs, also the what and why, the system level challenges that make it more difficult to meet the needs of these youth, and the how, factors critical to planning and developing effective solutions. For conversation, it's really important, as Jessica mentioned earlier, to make clear what the term complex care describes and what it does not describe. It's really intended to describe the varied ways that addressing multiple needs affects the individuals experiencing them and the people who support them, compounded by the impacts of rigid systems often designed with a narrow scope. Complex care does not describe a category of people nor an individual person. Second part of our agenda, our friend and colleague, Dr. April Fernando, will share information on how trauma experiences are reflected in this specific area and review how it looks in a data set. Sorry, part two is here. So trauma-informed systems, the role of the IP-CANS, what the data shows, and IP-CANS and CFTs. So common characteristics, multiple health systems involvement where juvenile justice, behavioral health, developmental disability, and other service sectors work simultaneously to address different aspects of an individual youth's needs. These are pretty common. I would also say education would be another important partner here. we want to make sure that they're also included since they're such a big part of our youth lives. We want to also recognize that complex and extensive trauma histories color most encounters. It's really common, right? We all know that kids don't come into our system or touch our system unless there's been trauma. Trauma-informed practices are an adjunct and not uniformly available, something that we're really trying to expand, promote, and build capacity for in California. It's been a big focus of ours here at CDSS. Existing healthcare and safety net systems are not well resourced to meet the needs of people dealing with multiple health and behavioral health challenges. We really struggle with systems that are not designed to work together on multiple issues. Systems often focus on a single need or the most pressing issue, while chronic or ongoing issues are minimized or neglected to varying degrees. Social, familial, and economic issues may be dismissed outright, creating or hardening barriers to badly needed support. And really, a lot of this has to do with the crisis level of kids with complex needs. All of those of us that have worked with kids with these kinds of needs know that we're often reacting to the current situation, the current crisis, the current needs. And to see if, as we'll talk more about the CFT process, being able to share the responsibility, share the support to the families and to the youth across our systems in a coordinated manner will really help overcome these challenges. Now, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Caroline, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning. Again, my name is Caroline Catan, and I am happy to be here this morning. A little bit about myself. I also work in the System of Care branch with CDSS. I work for Rebecca in the Integrated Services Unit. I've been with CDSS for, well, let's see. Well, I've got over, believe it or not, I have more than 30 years experience working for the state and have been supporting children and family services for, gosh, I think more than 20 of those years. My passion for this work really comes from, it was born out of my experience as a caregiver, really, for somebody with very complex needs. I'm the daughter of a woman that was mentally ill and homeless for many years, and so the challenges are real throughout our systems, and so it really is critical. I understand it and the criticality of it all, and very much appreciate the work that that all of you good folks are doing this. And again, as Jessica had shared, especially during this Social Worker Month, much appreciation to all of you. It is God's work because it is not easy. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide, James. Oh, I think we're on the right. No, I'm sorry. I think that we need to go back one. I apologize. That was my bad. So talking about some of these challenges. So yes, well, similar to what Rebecca was discussing, all of the challenges that are faced on, the direct challenges that are faced, it can leads to placement disruptions and challenges around because of the direct ways that direct challenges that youth and families are facing. Managing those disruptions is always difficult, and when they are particularly complicated, those challenges can be are even exacerbated, sometimes exponentially. What happens as a result, oftentimes there's even additional trauma that's then created even on top of that as a result, and making things can spiral and become even more difficult. Caregivers may not have sufficient support trying to understand and navigate, all of these systems. Sometimes we all know, even just the language itself that systems and professionals use that in and of itself can be absolutely be a barrier to being able to access and navigate these systems. They frequently have equally complicated processes and approvals that are necessary, and they may have competing kinds of priorities and approvals that are needed in order to get to the services that are needed. It is just so all of these things seem to be at times might likely feel that they're working against the very help that they are offering. Trying to find the pathway to good health, supporting good health can also be complicated, when folks live in neighborhoods that may not have much in terms of, does somebody live in an area where there are food deserts? Do they have access to healthy foods? Are there grocery stores? Are there walkable spaces? Are there parks nearby? These are the kinds of other kinds of details and factors that are not always front of mind, but do impact the way that people's lives play out, and their ability to achieve good health and maintain that good health. And so it's not always factored in when to the way formal systems respond, but they do absolutely impact the way that families function and their ability to achieve that positive outcomes and maintain good health. Okay, next slide. So all of those things, there's also system challenges for the very system itself, whether it's lack of specialized professional expertise, existing models of care may be limited to a very narrow scope. There's questions of accountability that may be difficult to discern, or hard, or simply lacking or absent entirely. There's limited resources available for agencies and systems to respond appropriately or fully. Especially when needs are when there's multiple needs, and so it's I think that most folks are probably familiar with how all of these challenges create barriers and what they can mean, and why it's so very difficult, and it's hard to help. It's hard to figure out how to navigate through that, especially when you factor in then difficulties around language, specialized terms, and and then if there are genuine language barriers, if there's people who are speaking that may not have English, may not be their first language, and all of those things that happen, it really does create an environment and where finding the help to really find success and achieve good positive outcomes becomes extremely difficult. And so the kinds of structural and institutional structures that are in place seem very, very much very, very difficult for any one individual to overcome. So at this point, I think what we'd like to do, if we could move to the next slide, is we'd like to hear a little bit about what experience is out there in our audience this morning. So when folks have, when you folks have, when you're working with youth with the most complex needs, what services and supports would be useful, but have been difficult to locate or access? So if you could either scan the QR code that you see there on the screen, or go to menti.com, I'm sorry, and type in that code number 4240-5273 and give us a response. If you're not able to access the code, the Mentimeter online, you can just type in your response in the chat, and we'll give everybody a minute or two to share your responses.
Just want to jump in and share. I'm really finding some of these responses very interesting. And I see a lot of options that might be outside our existing EPSDT or educational system, or might not be offered as frequently. EMDR therapy being one. I think I saw equine therapy. Specialized therapy around for sexual assault, substance use treatment, AOD, that's come up a couple of times. DBT, cultural brokers, very, very, very important.
Music therapy.
Music therapy. Brain spotting training. Interesting.
What's brain? I'm not sure what that I'm not familiar with that. Always ask.
Uber or Lyft services. Interesting. Getting kids to the services they need, or getting families to the services that they need in order to see their kids. Important, very important. Transportation is a big piece. And just so everyone knows, we're going to CDSS. We'll take all these responses and kind of collate them and bring them internal and talk about how the CFT team can support accessing these kinds of services and help with service mapping as we're looking through the immediate needs and building out the rate system. You know, some of these are great ideas to bring to that work group that's working on immediate needs.
Exactly. This is great information for us. So thank you very much for your input. Okay, but we have one more question for you that we would like to hear from you on. If we could go to the next question. It's so also, when you're working with youth with the most complex needs, what services and supports have been effective? What has worked well for you? And if you can't, if you're not able to come up with something, what would have been helpful? But what's worked?
Lots of shout outs to our wraparound here.
Yeah.
Emotional support
Staff, yeah.
Mentorship.
Peer support.
Yeah, peer-based support we've known can be very effective.
CFTM meetings, yay.
Focus CBT. One.
My apologies to everybody. I am trying to scroll down and it's not letting me. So I'm trying to work through some of that. I see the answers on the bottom, but my scrolling ability is a little limited, apparently.
Okay. Well, we appreciate the 66 responses that we've got so far. So 67. So keep them coming. And so it's and I see the other responses coming in the chat. Oh, there we go. Mobile support team. That's great.
Crisis response team I see in the chat as well.
CCPU services. Not sure what CCPU means.
Yeah, I see some acronyms. If you folks that are using acronyms, if you don't mind spelling them out in the chat, so when we take this back, we'll be able to decipher exactly what your intention to share with us is. Occupational therapy, yeah, I see that one as well. That's
Continuing care placement.
yeah.
Okay, thank you for spelling that out for me, for us all. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, this is also very helpful. We will also take this back to, it's important for us to understand what works. So we appreciate everybody's input and participation with that. And so, to that end, if we could go to the next slide, James, when we're talking about solutions and finding what works, so it's important that interventions are individualized, and dynamic, meaning plans need to be flexible. We've got to be able to respond to what in a way that's meaningful, and because people's everybody's lives, nobody's life is static, and things change, and so we need plans that can be changed and appropriate to that specific youth and family. And the complexity, as the term says, complex care, these are there's a need for multiple service sectors to be involved, and so we really need that cross-sector and cross-system expertise to be part of the solution. And so it's really important that organizations, plural, work together as a team. And so that's the key. It really is key. In order to be able to look at a youth and their family, holistically, we really need a complete view of what the needs are, what the strengths are, what the preferences are, what's driving, what are the drivers in this family and for this youth that can help us identify solutions that will be effective to reaching goals and maintaining good health and positive outcomes. When plans include perspectives of all of the relevant professional expertise, all of the the youth themselves, their family, the people that care about them, when all of those perspectives are reflected in a plan, in the interventions when they're designed with all of those perspectives reflected, so that so that those things are respected and reflected in that intervention plan, they're much more likely to be successful. There's also an opportunity to build understanding, leverage expertise of across sectors, and really be able to bring a multifaceted approach to complex challenges as we discussed previously. And so that holistic approach really can, really does make a difference. So some of the strategies that we think makes sense, there's, youth and family engagement really are key. We've got to try to, we've got to do our best, but prioritize for youth in foster care. We've got to prioritize maintaining those connections with youth and with their family, and placing youth with their siblings, if there's siblings involved, with their family, whenever that's possible, and doing our level best to keep them in family settings. It's critical. If that can't happen, we've got to make sure that we are we maintaining opportunities for that regular contact with siblings and other family members to happen on a regular basis, ongoing basis, so that those connections are not lost. It's important that youth have a meaningful role in developing their intervention plans and strategies for their own well-being, so that youth are not just service recipients. They are active. They should be active participants in their own well-being and and help to determine their own their own outcomes and their own well-being, because that's they should we need to make sure that we are involving them as to the extent possible. We can't, they're much more than simply service recipients. And so when the teams work with the youth and their family as partners, everybody's job is a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Caroline. I'll hop in and share a little bit too around this side. I mean, I think it sounds like most folks on this call are probably pretty, familiar with the need for teaming and the collaboration. And when we're talking about kids with complex needs, it becomes even more critical that all folks that come to the table are really prioritizing the youth and family perspective and the voice and the shared decision making, but also leveraging each other's resources, supports, and expertise to help meet the needs of families. And I noticed in the Mentimeter, we had a lot of, when we're talking about needs for family-based care and for caregivers, peers, and such, really also looking at the youth, the caregivers, when youth are in placement, what are the caregivers' needs, right? What's the caregiver education? Having been a caregiver, knowing that I had youth placed with me where I didn't have a lot of history, a lot of knowledge, a lot of times they came with complex diagnoses. I, was responsible for understanding what that diagnosis meant, and seeking education, right, around how do we parent a child, how do you provide care to a child with specific needs. They should always, I think a big aspect of meeting the needs of kids with complex care is really including caregiver education components that include specialized training and coaching on specific interventions and models and strategies. Like, for example, we talked about the neurosequential model of therapeutics, very important. Any kind of reparative parenting is not a routine training, right? It's not a seat-based training, it's a coaching model. And it's an approach that empowers caregivers to effectively foster healing and safety in a family environment. So just wanted to highlight that as one of the things of having been a caregiver for youth with complex needs and worked with many families over the years, have met that the level of commitment is really supported when they feel supported and they have that team that they can rely on. Nelson, I think. You can go to the next slide. I think we're turning it over to Dr. April.
Thanks so much, Rebecca and Caroline, and Richard, for highlighting the ICPM, the Integrated Core Practice Model, in the chat. My name's April Fernando. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a consultant, and I am coming to you from Chicago, surprisingly enough. But I am working to support CDSS in their efforts to integrate the CANs into practice. So a little bit about my background. I actually lived in California most of my life and trained in California, licensed in California. So for all intents and purposes, I'm still a Californian. I am acutely aware that myself and many psychologists who work with children and youth were trained on the backs of foster children. And because of that, my passion for the work started with the group of children that I worked with the most. And not only that, it wasn't just the group of children, it was the people I worked with in community-based organizations who were funded with public dollars that really grew that passion in me to be able to do this work. So I do less and less direct service these days. However, I do work, mostly my consultation is to make sure that our public systems are doing the best they can to serve children and youth. All right. So let me get to my part of the presentation. Youth who require complex care. They present with various combinations of needs, as you know, mental health and medical needs, medical developmental needs, physical needs and medical needs, just to name a few. And in child welfare, as we have already talked about, children and youth also have needs related to the trauma that they've experienced that can manifest in many different ways. So I'd like to take the example of trauma to talk about how the Integrated Practice Child and Adolescent Needs and Strengths, or the IP-CANs, can help in identify complex needs and guide the care that these children require. So as a note, much of what I'm going to talk about in this first few slides, much of what I'm going to talk about in these first few slides come from a paper that John Lyons and I published in 2023, and the citation is at the bottom of the slide if you want to look at it. It's an open source paper, so you don't have to pay for it. You can just click on it and read it. And I also want to remind you that if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them as soon as we can. In order to support youth who have traumatic stress as a component of their complex needs, we have to have systems that are able to support them. So this slide identifies 6 indicators of a trauma-informed system. And as I go over these, think about the organization and the county, as well as the state systems you work in, and see if they measure up. So the first 2 bullet points remind us that within a trauma-informed system, a flexible assessment approach and adaptive tools are required. So first, trauma detection is a part of a youth's earliest experience upon entry into care. And not only our tools, but our mindset is about understanding whether or not youth have been exposed to trauma and the impact that it's had on them. We need tools and an approach to practice that's always listening to traumatic stress in our youth. And this is not just a one-time deal. We have to do it in an ongoing way. The next 3 bullet points note the need for shared fundamental knowledge about traumatic stress, right? We know that people's stories unfold over time, and this is especially true about our happen in relationships, more often with people that we know. And there are layers of shame linked to these experiences, which makes trust something that's earned over time. We need to have assessment tools that are flexible and can adapt to the unfolding of our youth stories. Another point, our organizations and our systems in general have to be learning communities, right? We have to be able to learn from our successes and, more importantly, our mistakes. We gain the most experience from being able to share our mistakes, unpack them, and understand them. We need a learning culture where it's okay to relearn things because the nuance of our work comes from relearning and deepening our understanding. We need to trust our understanding of people and the relational context in which we know them. The people we work with have been hurt in relationships. Part of their healing will be through relationships. Evidence-based practices are a great place to start. With the children in care, however, we need to be okay with tailoring our EBPs to the particular circumstances of the child. And the final bullet point here, we need to use the data we have about the people we know, what's working and what isn't. Use the data from our organizations, our state, to better understand who's doing great work with which children and which families, so that we can benefit from each other's success and improve our practice overall. Too often when we see data, we're too quick to punch holes into it when it doesn't seem to match our internal experience of the work. I've done this a lot. Instead, let's take a curiosity approach to the data and wonder what it might mean to our view of the world and how the information can improve the ways that we provide support. So I didn't put this on a Mentimeter, but I wonder how you did, how your organization did, how your county did, how the state is doing in being a trauma-informed system. All right, I'm going to move to the next slide here if I can. There we go. All right. Early in my training as a clinician, it became immediately obvious that just because individuals were exposed to trauma did not mean that they would show symptoms of traumatic stress. Further, exposure to the same traumatic stress traumatic exposure didn't mean that the same traumatic stress symptoms would arise. You probably know of families or siblings within the same families that were exposed to the same traumas, and they don't manifest traumatic stress in the same way. And as this slide notes, the relationship between trauma exposure and traumatic stress is not uniform. Yet, in my clinical training days, all the foster children on my caseload were provided the same therapy, regardless of their symptom presentation or lack thereof. And as it says on this slide, providing trauma treatment for children without symptoms of traumatic stress may actually re-traumatize them and force traumatic stress to emerge when there isn't any to begin with. On the other hand, we may not necessarily be keen to all the ways children exhibit their traumatic stress, and these children could go untreated. So how do we avoid these two extremes? See if I can change the slide. All right. So from the research that we've done in child welfare systems, we note that it's not until a child has been exposed to 7 or 8 different traumatic experiences, 7 or 8, that they are routinely reported as exhibiting traumatic stress. If that sounds extreme or a little bit too late, you're right. Like, why aren't we detecting traumatic stress, and what might we do to address it? This slide identifies 3 things that may be happening. There are probably more things going on, but let's focus on these 3 and what can be done about it. And as you will see, different practice solutions are needed to address different presentations. So maybe we missed the traumatic stress. What can we do about that? Well, what we could do is provide more support to our staff, training, coaching, supervision to help them understand how traumatic stress is manifested over the course of a young person's life, because it's different with the littles as it is with the, elementary school age, as it is with our preteens and our teens. Okay, maybe traumatic stress is not currently observable, but we have this feeling it's going to unfold over time. What do we do then? Get my slide to cooperate. Let's see if we can provide some prevention and early intervention. And maybe we have a child that is resilient and won't experience traumatic stress, despite the fact that we know they have had multiple trauma exposures. What then? Then maybe we need to acknowledge that this young person has strengths, and we need to provide support in maintaining and further developing their strengths. Those are just 3 things we can do, but what else could we do? All right. So what we could do is we need to understand people. From the moment that we meet children and families, we need to take in the information about them to know what we can do to provide them support. It really helps to have a tool that engages people that we're trying to support. As I mentioned previously, building trust with individuals who've been exposed to trauma can be challenging. If we have tools that engage people, ones that help them to tell their story, articulate what they care about, where they're having challenges, where they could use some help, what they do to get by, a tool like this could help people feel like they have a voice. But using tools like this is a shift for those of us who work with young people and families. We're used to filling out tools, or rather forms, and then piecing information from them together, much like a jigsaw puzzle, to convey the circumstances of the youth. Instead, we're being asked to use a tool together with young people and their families, a tool that captures and highlights their story, kind of like editing a video together, splicing together footage to create their story. We can't put the footage together without them because it's their story and not ours. We also need a tool that can adapt to changes, a tool that helps us update parts of the story that need to be updated so we can track growth and change over time. The CANS happens to be such a tool, right? It helps us understand people in the context of the relationship that we're building with them. And that's really, really important because a lot of tools don't do that. All right, let's change the slide here. The Integrated Practice CANS, or the IP CANS, is used within a teaming environment, as you know, a CFT, and provides an information tracking and documentation hub for the youth's complex needs, identifying their needs and strengths, noting what supports and interventions have worked and on what areas, and where they could still benefit from help. But what role does the IP CANS play in the care of the youth? So as you see in the graphic on this slide, the IP CANS captures the current story of the young person as it unfolds and with the input of the many people on the team who know that young person. Once the team has a shared understanding of who the youth is and their current circumstance, they're able to create goals together that represent change that's possible for the youth and the family. And with this planned in hand, the team is now able to move forward with care in a collaborative and a coordinated way. So as you see, the information about a youth's needs, however, is not in and of itself sufficient to provide them with adequate care. It's really important to understand the context of the young person's life in order to make the best decisions around their care. And that is where teaming becomes really, really important. But let's get really specific about this. What exactly can the IPCANs do around complex care for youth with traumatic stress? So I'm going to show some IPCANs data, but before I show it, I want to provide some background on it. As you may know, the IPCANs will be used to determine rates for foster youth, rates based on the youth's assessed level of needs and strengths, rather than their placement. So how was this done? How is this possible? So what happened was this: the IPCANs ratings were analyzed using a statistical method called the latent class analysis. And you might hear the term LCA being thrown around. This meant that the IPCANs ratings for over 25,000 children ages 0 to 5 and over 35,000 children ages 6 and up were analyzed, and classes or groups of children were identified based on the similarity of their pattern of CANS items. For the youth ages 6 and up, 7 groups were noted. These 7 groups were further divided into 2 pathways. 3 groups were organized around the presence or absence of strengths, which were called the strength pathway, and this became tier 1 of the rate structure. The last 4 groups out of the 7 were organized around the presence or absence of traumatic stress symptoms. This became the trauma-informed pathway and resulted in tiers 2 and 3 of the rate structure. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some data on these 4 traumatic stress symptom groups to help us understand how useful the IPCANs can be in caring for youth with complex needs. All right. So the tables you're going to see are all about youth ages 6 through 21. What these tables show are the probabilities that the indicator or the item in the domain would be actionable. In other words, rated 2 or 3. Remember, items or indicators, as I like to call them, rated actionable mean that we need to either address a need or build a strength. Okay, so we're looking at the probability that the indicator or the item is going to be actionable, because that's where the work is, right? And that's where the complexities start to arise. So let me orient you to this table. So on the very top here, you will see a series of dots that are colored. These are telling you the percentages of actionable items, right? So if it's blue, that means from 0 to 19% actionable. If it's purple, 20 to 39% actionable. If it's yellow, 40 to 59% actionable. If it's orange, 60 to 79% actionable. And if it's red, it's 80 to 100% actionable. So the more we go from blue to red, the more, the higher the percentage of actionability, if you want to call it that. Okay. All right. So what we're looking at right now is the potentially traumatic adverse childhood experiences domain. And you can see all the indicators of that domain are listed here. So let's look at the columns. Column 4, remember there were 7. So these are the highest 4 groups in the group of 7 for 6 to 21-year-olds. Column 4 is called trauma-informed treatment. We have 2 groups that fall under comprehensive support. And then we have 1 group called intensive support. And as you see, from the bottom, the first three groups make up tier 2, and the last column or the last group is tier 3. If you just look at the colors, you will notice that the percentages of the indicators being actionable or rated 2 or 3 go up as you go from the left column all the way to the right column. There are more blue and purple dots on the left, and there are more orange and red dots on the right. Another way to say this, as we move from the trauma-informed treatment group to the intensive support group, the probability of the indicators being actionable tends to be higher. All right, let's look more closely at column 5 and 6, the ones in the middle. These two groups are noted as needing comprehensive supports. If you'll look at them closely, you'll notice that they have the same trauma exposure indicators with the exact same probabilities that they will be actionable or rated 2 or 3. However, they're separated by the statistical procedure as different groups. So as the title says here, same IP CANS ratings, but not the same story. So let's expand our view of these youth using the CANS. If I can change the slide. There we go. All right. So what we're looking at now is the behavioral emotional needs domain and the life functioning domain, again for ages 6 through 21, with the same colored dots meaning the same thing. So what do we notice first? The same trend as in the previous table we see here. More blue and purple dots on the left, more orange and red dots on the right. This indicates that there's more probability that the indicators will be rated 2 or 3 or actionable as we go up into the groups. Another way to say this, and I'll say this several times, more actionable indicators, more complexity. So you're starting to see the complexity even within the trauma-informed pathway groups. Compare the trauma-informed treatment, group 4, and the intensive support treatment, group 7. You can see the contrast between these groups just by looking at the colors of the dots between the two groups. More yellows and oranges, even a red in the intensive support, and more blues and purples in the trauma-informed treatment. Now, the groups you want to focus on are 5 and 6. Remember that these two groups, 5 and 6, have identical probabilities of being actionable on the trauma exposure indicators. The pattern of actionable indicators here, however, differs, right? Both in the behavioral emotional needs indicators as well as the life functioning indicators. Here we're beginning to see how the pattern of actionable indicators identifies an internalizing group of youth versus an externalizing group of youth, both of which need comprehensive supports. There are higher percentages of actionable items for the externalizing group on, as you see here, impulsivity, hyperactivity, oppositional, conduct, anger control in the behavioral emotional needs. And in the life functioning domain, decision-making, school behavior, school achievement. Is this surprising to you? Maybe you anticipated these higher percentages of actionable items on these particular indicators. I want to also highlight that there's a higher probability of being actionable on the developmental intellectual indicator for externalizing youth. So I want you to think, what does that mean in terms of planning? We have more developmental intellectual needs in the externalizing group than we do in the internalizing group. All right, I'm going to pause because Elizabeth has a question in the chat. Columns 4 to 7 are services that children received. Elizabeth, can you clarify your question just a little bit more? These are not services they're received. These are descriptions. So the descriptions of the different groups are telling you kind of, they're describing how the groups are becoming more complex as we go from 4 to 7, if that's what you were asking. You're welcome. All right. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Before I do that, Jesse says oppositional can be healthy and compliance can be problematic. Absolutely. How does it rate good opposition versus bad opposition? So oppositional in the CANS is about pushing up against people of authority, which, like you said, there can be a healthy kind of pushing back at people. But it's also the kind of oppositional that impacts your functioning at a rate of 2 or 3. So yes, I agree. Oppositional can be survival strategy, but if it's impacting your functioning and creating barriers for you, then we have to understand if there's a need to support around oppositional. It might not be the best strategy. I'm happy to talk more about that if people have more questions. All right, I'm going to keep moving on this. So now we're looking at risk behaviors and cultural factors. And we see the same trend as in the previous table, right? More blue dots on the left and in this case, more purple and yellow dots on the right. We don't have any red or orange dots here. And again, that indicates that there's more probability of the indicators being actionable as the group, as we go up in the complexity of the group. It's interesting to note that the first 2 groups here, groups 4 and groups 5, don't tend to engage in very much risky behaviors. And if, again, you compare the trauma-informed group on the very left-hand side with the intensive support group on the very right-hand side, you can see the clear distinction and the contrast in risk behaviors between these groups. We don't see much difference around the cultural factors across any of these groups. Now, the externalizing group has higher probabilities of being actionable on danger to others, runaway, and intentional misbehavior than the internalizing group. These particular risk behaviors might not be too surprising to you for youth who you note probably as having externalizing behaviors. And the last slide I'm going to share with you focus on the strengths domain. Indicator or item is rated 2 or 3. In other words, as the dots move towards yellow, orange, and red, this shows increasing percentages of low to no strengths. These are strengths that are to be built or developed. And to me, this is probably one of the most interesting tables. Interesting because the other tables kind of fit my view of the world about internalizing and externalizing young people. This was interesting because it was new to me. It might not be new to you. It was new to me. And it shows clear differences between these groups. The distinction again between trauma-informed treatment and intensive support groups are clear, right? And probably as you expected, the intensive support group has few to no strengths, which is quite concerning. What is also interesting and maybe most surprising is the difference between internalizing and externalizing groups. The internalizing group has less strengths than the externalizing groups. And the difference in the strengths indicators is one of the more prominent distinctions between these 2 groups of youth who, if you will recall, had the same trauma exposures at the same probabilities of being actionable. So here's my question to you all. If we do not consider strengths in understanding internalizing youth, would our treatment be sufficient? So in summary, and as I end my section of this presentation, I hope that I've illustrated how the IPCANS is helpful to complex care practice. We've taken one group of youth with complex needs, those with traumatic stress symptoms. We've seen that while youth may have exact trauma exposures, they may not necessarily exhibit the same traumatic stress symptoms. And from the CANS data tables that we've reviewed on the probabilities of being actionable, specifically looking at internalizing and externalizing groups of youth, it's important that we understand their pattern of actionable indicators and not forgetting the strengths so that we can fully understand how to address the care for these youth's complex needs. So I'm going to turn this over to Caroline and Rebecca.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Fernando. And really quick, I noticed we do have a participant that has their hand raised. Christine, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Oh, nope, it was an accident. Okay.
It was an accident. Yes, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
No problem. Okay, let's go ahead and move on.
Thanks, April. April, I do have one request for you. Could you please explain for everybody what the difference between the internalizing and externalizing groups and what that means?
Oh, so kids who are externalizing, let's see. Let me go back. I'll show you an easy way to think this through. So if we look at the externalizing group, you can see that in comparison to the internalizing group, they tend to do things, they do behavioral things that impact other people. Whereas the internalizing group tends to do things that might be more within themselves. They internalize things versus putting it outside of them. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that we explained that a little bit so that we could so that folks had that context to be able to understand the distinction, because otherwise it might be mysterious.
The labels are just labels. So Laura, your comment is that, our society tends to value externalizing versus internalizing. That's actually, I believe that myself. But what this is saying is these behaviors that are being externalized are impacting their function and getting in their way such that they need support. And the internalizing behaviors are doing the same thing. They're impacting their functioning and getting in their way such that they need support. Now, we tend to highlight externalizing behaviors more because they're scarier to us. And we tend to not highlight internalizing behaviors because we tend not to see them as much, right? That's a training issue that we need to work on to make sure that we're highlighting the needs of kids, regardless whether they're internalizing or externalizing. Does that help, Laura?
Yeah, and April, I'd like to chime in. I think that you bring up such a good point. The engagement of the family, the peers, the caregivers for kids with internalizing behaviors might be missed, except for folks that are very familiar and know them well, might be able to pick up on when the internalizing behaviors are present or increasing. So it might not be visible to all of us, like externalizing behavior. We all see that, right? We'll see that in the classroom, in the community, and in the home. But the internalizing, sometimes in my experience has been that kids with those behaviors are often overlooked because they're quieter about it.
Exactly.
That's why looking at the strengths is so important. I mean, look at this. Community life is red. It looks like intensive support kids, right? So So all I'm hoping is that you will use the data to help you understand more, right? You bothered to collect it, you might as well use it.
Okay, so we are hopeful that you're beginning to see them and understand and appreciate how the CANs within, especially within that CFT process, is useful, and how it can, and how that information really can be applied to, particularly with when addressing the needs of youth with complex care needs. And so because it does really require you know, that a team, an entire team. You need folks that are coming from different perspectives in order to find solutions that that will be effective. And so in California, we are utilizing the CFT process, which is intended to be a team-based approach and a collaborative process to include perspectives from multiple people that are important, that are to the youth and family, that are supporting, and the people that are important to the youth and family themselves, so that they can develop solutions that are meaningful. The IP CANs tool helps it creates common language and allows us to collect information that that can be used and leveraged, to develop plans that will, and interventions that will be that are appropriate and can be applied and used in a way that will are likely to be effective and successful. Team membership, the people that you have. Oh, I'm sorry. I see a question in the chat. Are you suggesting that the CFT is used to complete the CANs? Not to complete the CANs, but the IP CANs should be completed in the context of the CFT, meaning the CFT, all of the CFT members absolutely contribute to the completion of that CAN. It's got to include the input and perspectives of everybody that's included on that child and family team and in that process. So that those perspectives are reflected in the completion of that IP CANs tool, so that you have so that what's created is a comprehensive and full picture of the whole person, that so that when we understand a youth, we understand, as April said earlier, that we understand a youth's strengths and needs in the context of their entire life. Where do they live? Who is important to them? What are their priorities? What are their goals? What do they care about? What do they enjoy doing? All of those things, all of those factors. It's important that we have that full picture to really be able to effectively support and provide the necessary services and connect them with the help that they that will produce positive outcomes. And so when everybody is engaged in a process, it makes that process a bit easier, and it's intended to be the CANs tool is intended to be completed collaboratively and with an agreement reached by consensus. And I would also like to point out that consensus doesn't mean that you have unanimous agreement. It doesn't mean that everybody says, yay, that we're all on board. It means that at minimum, there are no firm objections to anything that's done, but that you have but that you've gone through a process to reach a consensus that on the ratings. And so it's important to include everybody's perspective, so that there is consensus on what needs to be what requires action, and what does not. And so it really does help to create that framework and common language, as I said, for understanding the issues, the needs, and how to move forward in a way that's going to help to make meaningful progress towards goals. Okay, I think that we are going to turn, I'm going to hand this off to Rebecca, I believe.
Thank you, Caroline. I will move the slide forward. There we go. All right, just a little delay on the slide. So as we heard from Dr. Fernando regarding how we can look at the cans and look at the strengths, look at the needs, look at our kids through the lens of not just a tier they're associated in, but really around, you know, where are the primary needs and where do they fall grouped together. And so when we talked a little bit earlier about focusing on how as a team we often react to whatever the current crisis is, having the information about the youth and across all of the domains is really going to be helpful for coordinating an effective CFT team to leverage and combine and support each other with the resources that are needed to meet all of the youth's needs, not just what the current presenting problem is. So we really want to talk about, you know, strengthening the opportunities for youth and caregivers to identify and access community resources. You know, it's very complicated in our communities. There are often many resources that either aren't known or access to might be cumbersome and difficult, takes a lot of time. We know our case carrying workers, our clinicians often just don't have the time to keep that knowledge, you know, in-house for when a family might need something as furniture or mentoring programs or other things that we think might help support the youth. How do we access those? Well, you do that through the power of the child and family team, right? Everybody within that team should have the responsibility and the permission to help identify with the youth and family at the center of voice and choice, what might be helpful to them, and then take those, once those are identified, take responsibility, a task, an action item to help get that family to those resources, to help them meet the eligibility, to walk them through the steps that they need to access that care. That's also the same for caregivers who are struggling meeting the needs of complex care youth within their home environment. They have maybe a sibling group or they have multiple kids with high needs. They're going to need that support as well. We also have to look at, you know, formal support systems, you know, are great and provide a benefit, but we also know that informal supports, peers, mentorships, other types of, you know, it could be sports, it could be music, you know, what are the strengths of that youth that we can build upon within the child and family team? That youth has an interest in music, can they get DJ lessons? Can they have music lessons? Something to that effect. How can the CFT support them in accessing those? We also know that, you know, when individuals and organizations work together, the child and family well-being outcomes can absolutely improve. Some of us have seen that in action, and I'm sure you all have as well. The kinds of collaborative approach helps build trust too and understanding, and it also may help spark new ideas, renew interest in old ideas deserving of attention, or lead to creative solution, right? Someone mentioned the other day, many hands make light work. Love that adage. Using the power of the child and family team to actionize that is probably the best way to message that to all. Multidisciplinary teams may have expertise that can be leveraged in new ways to address familiar issues and barriers because the team remains focused on the needs of the youth and family. Saw a lot of, you know, in the comments when we did the Mentimeter, things like equine therapy, things like trauma-focused CBT, you know, where are those available within the community? Who offers that? Who offers PCIT? Is that something that the family might benefit from, the caregiver might need to help meet the needs of the youth? Those are things that not one person may have knowledge of. And work with the team to either identify, partner with the family, the youth, the caregiver, and accessing really does build trust when we hear from our youth and caregivers and their families that their hopes and dreams have been listened to, respected, and actionized upon really moves forward to healing and hope. What's in the next slide? There we go. So the California IP CANs and the CFT process. We've talked a bit about youth mentors and parent partners. They can also be resource navigators. Often folks that act as parent partners and youth mentors are very familiar having walked that walk, having navigated those systems. They can really bring perspective and real life experience to the child and family team meeting, and really help all of the partners within the scope of their own case planning and work by helping the family identify and navigate. We want to make sure that also we recognize that youth and family are full partners in the process. Again, we can't reiterate enough that listening to youth, listening to the family, the parents and caregivers together. We do know that there are 4 caregiver domains in the IP CANs. CDSS really supports our partners in making sure that all 4 domains are completed, so that we can both fully support the parents in their effort to reunification by understanding what their needs are and their strengths are, and by the caregivers who are actively, parenting, working with that child, that youth currently, and what are their needs. I saw a little bit in the chat about, where do we complete the CANs? Well, as Caroline mentioned, it really does need to be completed collaboratively. Agreement needs to be reached by consensus. Now that can look in different ways. Some folks do bring a copy, a draft of the IP CANs to the CFT meeting. They, have discussion about it, right? Youth and family driven. And reach consensus there to finalize the CANs. I think that's one of the most effective ways we've heard for collaboration, so that we're ensuring that everyone's input is captured, is a great way to do it. If there's other ways that folks that are on this call have, found a way to reach consensus and agreement along the IP CANs, please feel free to put some of those tips and tricks in the chat. We'd love to be able to share those across our systems, because we really believe that completing the CANs in isolation through your own lens, your own scope of practice, and your own experience doesn't show us the full picture. Also, we want to make sure that we have that common language for understanding the issues, needs, strengths, and goals. As we saw in the data that was provided, right, kids in the different classes and within the tiers present differently. We talked about internalizing, externalizing. We talked about strengths. We really need to understand as a team, is this an internalizing kid or an externalizing kid? That's going to change how we, might provide support, how we might engage them, what kind of services might be beneficial. So really looking at that and making sure we have the full picture under that common language. I think at this point, we're running a little early today, so I want to open it up for questions and support. I'm also going to pop in the chat. We didn't put it in our slides, and so that's a failure of ours. The integrated core practice model. Really encourage folks to use that as a framework when you're thinking about building collaboration, when you're thinking about engaging system partners and completing the IP CANs and a robust CFT process that is youth and family centered. Please use the integrated core practice model as the guide for establishing that, both at your leadership level and down to the individualized practice level. We find it absolutely one of the best resources that we have within the department for communicating across our system partners the need for collaboration and engagement. Do you have any questions?
Rebecca, I do want to highlight one thing in the chat. Following my what I was sharing, Elizabeth put in the chat that she said, we as therapists are currently completing the CANs within mental health assessment, but it sounds like it should wait for the CFTM. And so, and I'll read my response to that comment. thank you for the clarification on this issue. CFT members do not need to wait for a meeting to provide input, and professionals do not need to schedule a CFT meeting each time, to collect input from each member of the CFT. And so I want to make sure, and the reason I wanted to take the time just to explain this is because it does, to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to understand this and hear this. You can, it's absolutely acceptable to, get the input from different members of this who are on the CFT and get, as Rebecca explained, and include all of that input and into a draft into a completed CANs that you can bring to a CFT meeting. That's a draft version that can be shared and discussed among the team members. When you have a meeting, you don't need to wait, and hold it until you hear that there's a CFT meeting been scheduled, or try to schedule a meeting for each individual member or something. You can collect that input outside of a formal meeting and then bring that draft version of the completed CANs to the meeting.
Yeah, thank you for that, Caroline. Folks may not always be available, but as a caseworker, you might have access to school records. You might have an access to IEP where you can get information there, even if folks aren't available to participate directly. You can have a conversation, look at the assessments, look at the file, interview the caregivers. Often are a rich source of information on what's happening in the youth's life. I do want to also, I saw that Gregory Manning had a comment. Oh, it slipped down. See that. Envision linking the CANS rating to the caregiver rate will have any impact the nature of the CFT conversation and consensus process. I don't, Dr. Fernando, I might tap you to answer this, but to my knowledge, that the caregiver needs and strengths are not included in the decision support model that assigns a tier. Am I correct?
That is correct. It's just focused on the needs and the strengths of the young person.
Thank you. Dr. Fernando, I see another question for you. Is the CFT model different in Illinois versus California?
That's a really good question. I hadn't thought about that. Yes and no. I'm sure there are little tweaks and, ways in which every state and region does things slightly differently, depending on how they're translating requirements and et cetera. I think philosophically, they are the same. I think part of that is because the CFT in California, and this, if I may be so bold, the CFT in California and the CFT in Illinois are offshoots of high fidelity wraparound.
An important point. As we move into, wraparound in the system of care environment, with it being aftercare, very important for that CFT and IP CANs when youth are receiving wraparound services and are involved in child welfare, probation, that there's one IP CANs, one CFT per child. So that collaboration becomes very, very important for those, and those are often our youth with our complex needs, right? So that those teams working together or actually forming one team for the benefit of the youth and family is really critical. Another question, what is the expectation of using the child's community to assist with completing the CANs? Well, expectation is engagement. Community partners may not be as familiar with the CANs. They may not understand their role in helping, determine the ratings within the CANs. I think Geraldine popped in resource in the chat. Our CDSS CFT IP CANs web pages have a rich source of free resources for communication to our partners about the cans. There's a cans one pager on there. There are videos around the CFT cans process, brochures, links to surveys, all ways to engage folks in understanding their role and participation in completing the cans. Can we set a requirement? Not so much, but we do say if you have a formal agreement with a partner to complete IP cans or facilitate CFTs on behalf of a child welfare or probation agency, that the expectation for their participation should be embedded within those agreements, and so that everyone has a clear understanding of their role and participation in both the CFT and CANS process. I hope that answers your question. Dr. Fernando, Caroline, want to add to that at all?
No, I think.
Nope.
No? Okay.
I do see a question for you, Rebecca. Should all members receive a copy of the completed cans as a best practice?
Right, as a best practice. I think from the standpoint of youth and family, I think you have a conversation with the youth and the family about their level of comfort with that. Typically, I think in San Diego County, for example, there was a laminated cans was brought where folks each received a copy of that, and they are able to kind of discuss the ratings, and then that at the end, they're all decided upon, it's collected and not shared outside of the context of the CFT in the room. It's kind of, I think that's really a great practice because it gives folks the ability to collaborate alongside each other during the CFT meeting. But then as folks leave, all of the information stays within that, with the organization facilitating the CFT or responsible for the care of the child welfare agency. I hope that helps. I don't know, Dr. Fernando, I know you've been across the US and folks are doing it differently everywhere. Any other input there?
Parents really want to understand the information from the tool and be able to facilitate the process of sharing their child's story across the different providers that they see. So having a copy of the cans to share so that especially in behavioral health settings where every time you have an episode opening, you have to have another cans, right? You want to be able to start from a cans so that you can build on it rather than have to tell the story over and over again. So as much as we can share that, there are a lot of complications to sharing this information. One of them was mentioned, right? You don't want a whole bunch of cans flying around the house or being left in different rooms or whatever. There's a lot of complications with sharing the information, but the best practice is everyone who is involved should understand and know and be working from the same cans so that they're coordinated in their efforts. There's a question from Christine. Christine, thank you for pointing out my error. The trauma section is rated 0-1 and 0 is no, 1 is yes, and 1 is a 2 or 3 basically. So thank you for correcting that error that I kept blathering on and on about. So you're correct. The trauma section is rated 0-1.
There's another question in here. Does a family need to agree with the CAN scores? Dr. Fernando, you want to take that one?
I will certainly try. So the cans, so first of all, this is a little pet peeve of mine. I don't like to call them scores. I like to call them ratings because scores feel a little judgy to me. So, and language matters. So that's number one. Number two, the rating is describing what's happening. So if they don't agree with it, then let's have a discussion. That's the whole point of consensus building and integrating perspectives. If they don't agree with it because they're worried it's going to make them look bad, then it's up to us to help them understand the point of the ratings. It's not about judging them. It's about being able to provide them the support they need. So that's how I would go about answering the question.
Thank you. I see Lucinda. Can parents get a copy of the Kansas assessment? I think we kind of addressed that. OC Orange County uses laminated forms. And each member has a copy of their results to review. When we're talking about parents, I think that, I mean, as a parent, having a copy of an assessment, I would think I would have, I think I would value having that as the parent myself. I don't know the different practices within the county, but I can't see a reason why a parent should not have a copy of a CANS assessment. But I haven't, want to hear from others with that experience of sharing that if there's other input there.
Ooh, Christine, go for it.
Okay, this time it was for real. So what we do in Siskiyou is when we do a CANS in the CFTs with our youth, and primarily for our foster youth, we do it in the CFTs so that we can get feedback from the entire treatment team, which is how they recommend us to do that when you go through those different trainings. But we found that it's actually much more helpful because you get the client who gets to participate and say how they think they're doing. And then how does the rest of the team think that they're doing? In doing the caregivers, I love our system. And I don't know how many counties are using Smart Care, but we're using Smart Care. And the thing I like about it in that system is you can add as many caregivers as you need to, which is fantastic because our previous one was Anasazi, and we would put the CANS in and you could identify one caregiver. And then it's, do you identify a biological parent? Do you identify the foster parent? And then it gets conflicting because where are they currently at? And how are they doing in that place they're living in as compared to the caregiver that you're doing the ratings on. So this system is much better, and I much prefer the IP CANS anyway. But being able to do that and do that as an entire team, it's a really great conversation. And we always provide a copy to the caregiver. And if we have a biological parent that's present, that's participating, then they get a copy as well, so that they know what's going on. And so it's not some secret document that we keep hidden and we get to talk about it, but they never get to see it.
Thank you, Christine. That was really helpful. And I appreciate you sharing that whole process. That was helpful. Is it Jolene? Is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Hi, I recently retired from San Diego County and was a manager in the South Bay. And we did have the laminated CANS forms that we used during the CFT, and they were blank CANS forms so that everybody could see them. They could also see the definitions and what they meant. And then that way we had kind of leveled the playing field for everybody in the meeting. They could see what we were talking about, but it's a portion of the CFT meeting. When we're talking about the CANS and we're going through the ratings, really we're using it to make sure that everybody gets that agreement and that we're forming those goals from those threes, right? From those actionable items, and really using those strengths, using those measurable strengths to really help the youth and the family. And everybody would get a copy of this CFT, and everybody would agree upon the goals, the actionable goals we were working on, and really having them focus on those goals, and then coming back and looking at the CANS again and getting to see that measurement and moving those threes to twos. That's the thing that's really the encouraging factor with having the CANS and the CFT. And so You know, then again, handing out the laminated versions, having, you know, either on a screen or present. You know, last time we were here, we talked about these were the goals we were working on. And this was the action plan that we did. How are we doing? And going through the scenarios really helpful. So that's how we were doing it in San Diego. I'm now retired and teaching, but you know, really having the youth, especially these higher end youth, have a part in really accelerating and raising their voice, and the family and the caregiver's voice, and using their words and their choices is really what we've seen impact with.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Jolene. And I'm just going to jump in for one moment. I'm just cognizant of time. We have about 10 minutes left. We're going to continue to answer questions, so please stay on if you're interested in hearing more, but we're also going to go ahead and drop our evaluation. So as we continue to answer questions, please, 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 for those of you in the audience, go ahead and take a moment to complete the evaluation. We greatly appreciate your feedback, and we do use it to inform what our complex care webinar topics may be. So please take a moment to complete that evaluation, and then I'll pass the baton back over to our presenters to continue answering questions.
Thank you, Jessica. Dr. Fernando, I see another one. I think this for you. Going back to the analysis of the CANs, you mentioned ratings of 2/3 for the trauma section. In mine, California CANs 50, the ratings in that section are yes or no only. Was the study using a different version?
No, I think I answered that question previously. It was an
Oh, did you?
error on my part. So
Okay.
thank you so much for pointing that out.
Next, when it comes to the CANs and the CFT meetings, how common is it that education is brought into the process prior to placement or changes? We do collect data on education's participation in the CFT meeting. Unfortunately, it's not super accurate in the system that we have currently, CWS CMS. But we do know that our education is a required partner when there is the educational rights holder, when there is discussion about a change of placement or school. So that's a very important piece that we will be, when the new CWS CARES system goes live in the fall of 2026, we will be able to capture more accurate data around participation. But again, really looking towards engagement of your education partners, identifying who the education rights holder is prior to the meeting and reaching out to them, or a school representative for participation is super important. Let's see. One from Conrad, OTA. Just mentioning for consistency, if the parents are given a copy of the assessment, the tribe should also be given a working document in the case of an Indian child. Yeah, thank you for lifting that up. Tribal engagement, tribe participation in the CFT and the CANs is required. It's not optional for our counties when in the case of an Indian child. We've released guidance to that effect. We recently released a tribal engagement guide for CFTs that's available on the webpage we shared. We really support folks diving into that, using those practices, reading the policy, and making sure that you are actively using active efforts is a big piece of CFT and CANS process and helping to meet the needs of children and their culture and their tribes.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. April, I see another question. I think that it's for you because I'm not entirely positive how to respond. From Michael, he asked, how does the CANS control for worker bias not understanding the youth culture or community, etc.
That's an awesome question. Thank you so much for asking it. You know, what really helps with bias and bias, you know, can be very problematic for young people. What really helps with bias is having people that are important to that young person in the CFT, and having a process that listens to everyone's perspective on what's being discussed, because that is what counters bias. Now there are moments where there's groupthink, or, you know, or it feels like to the young person that everyone's ganging up on them. But for the most part in CFTs, that doesn't happen, because it's other people really wanting to help the young person and the family, who are putting out their thoughts and their experience of that young person, because they want to help them. And because of that, the bias then can get addressed. But that's not enough. We need to make sure that our staff are very well trained to listen for and understand bias. And one of the biases that's coming up a lot across the state is that the voice of the youth and the voice of the family can kind of get squelched by the voices of the professional helpers. And so that's something we need to really make sure that youth and family voice are front and center. Even if we as the helping professionals don't necessarily agree, we're there to bring all our voices together so that we can come up with the best understanding of what's happening, so we can create the best plan that's going to help the young person and their family really grow and thrive. So there are many things that we have to do to address bias. Having people there that are important to the young person. So having a CFT that's only the professionals is not a great way to address bias, right? And I've heard that sometimes happens. The only people in the room are the professionals, not even the young person, not the family, just the professionals. That won't really help the cause.
I know wraparound oftentimes has a goal of having no more than 50% of the team professionals, so that you can at least not as an answer for bias, but as a means to try to control for it, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not always easy.
Yeah, thank you. I know we've just got a couple of minutes left. I don't see too many other questions, but to also reiterate, as Dr. April and Caroline, one way to record what has happened in the CFT, because another thing we heard during some listening sessions that we did across the state with different groups and from youth and families, is often what they felt that they agreed to or thought was going to happen as a result of the CANS ratings and the action items from the CFT following the meeting may have fallen through the cracks. Maybe some of the supports and services that they thought they were being referred to, or something, you know, or could be as simple as, no, not as simple, but as important as visits with siblings. If we aren't recording those action items, recording the disagreements about the action items in an action plan or another template, and making sure we're following up on that, that also leans towards bias. That, you know, we're really thinking that we're engaging folks, hearing their story, hearing their hopes and dreams, talking about what we want to do to support them, but not following up on it. That reduces the trust. That feels like the system is biased against them and doesn't respect their opinion, their hopes, and their dreams. So really important when, you know, sometimes things that folks want, that youth want, aren't achievable because of the case plan trajectory, because of legal reasons. That's fine and understood, you know, on the professional side of things, but it should be recorded somewhere so that folks have it in writing. And it's not just assumed that they understand the reason why that can't happen is, you know, because people don't care or they aren't taking the time to to engage and refer them or provide that service.
Thank you, Rebecca. Once again, everyone, I'm just noticing we have just a couple minutes left here for today's presentation. I want to take a moment to first and foremost share my gratitude and appreciation for Rebecca, Carolyn, and Dr. Fernando for being here with us today and for providing such an incredible presentation. It was very well organized and informative. I also want to personally thank all three of you for sharing the personal reasons that have brought you all into doing this work. And I'm just going to mention a few things about the presentation that really, really stuck out to me. Dr. Fernando, I really, really appreciated the slide and the conversation around indicators of a trauma-informed system. You really beautifully, it was really beautifully well put that these are tools and mindsets that allow us to recognize, understand, and ameliorate the impacts of trauma. There was also a really beautiful comment that Dr. Fernando made, which is people we work with have been hurt in their relationships. Part of their healing needs to take place in relationships. And last but not least, I really love the title of the slide, Same Ratings, Not the Same Story. I think this title helps remind us of our shifting mindset towards a person-centered, whole child, whole family system of care. So thank you. You all did a really beautiful job today. And with that, I think we have answered most of the questions that folks had. So to everyone in our audience today, thank you so much for being here. We hope to see you again next month for our April Complex Care webinar. And with that, thank you once again to the presenters, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.